I think the first team we're going to talk about here is going to be the Denver Broncos. They have Phillip Lindsay, who's gone back-to-back with 1,000-yard seasons, and they bring in Melvin Gordon on a decent contract. I believe it was 2 years, $16 million. Definitely not the contract Melvin was hoping for, but decent running back money nonetheless. So, Steph, what do you see for Melvin Gordon in Denver this year?
There's a lot that I see, and I really want to get into Melvin Gordon. He's been slowly rising up on my draft board as the offseason's gone on. And I know, shout out to Derek Ridlin and Well and Zap 624. You guys are commenting on our videos asking for us to break down Melvin Gordon. And so we're going to do that here. I think I have a pretty interesting take on him. The Broncos ran the ball a lot last year. They were the 10th highest in terms of run play percentage in the NFL in 2019. We had Phillip Lindsay, like you said there, and Royce Freeman. They had 356 carries between the two of them. So Lindsay was getting 62% of the carries in that backfield with 224 carries on the season. So think of a 60-40 split between Lindsay and Royce. Lindsay finishes the RB19. He was just okay last season. It was hard to know when to start him. The Broncos were on this QB carousel last year with Joe Flacco, Brandon Allen, and then Drew Lock coming in at the end. But in the offseason, this Denver team has made a ton of moves. They brought in Pat Shurmur this offseason, who historically runs a lot of outside zone, just like the Broncos did in 2019. So I don't expect a ton to change there. It's not like they're going to just suddenly become this power run gap team. And Shurmur likes to spread out the defense, get guys in space. He's brought out the best football from quarterbacks like Nick Foles, Case Keenum, and Daniel Jones with this philosophy. And a big part of Shurmur's offense is utilizing pass-catching running backs. Denver also invested in 2 wide receivers early in the draft, bringing in Jerry Jeudy and KJ Hamler. So to me, that says this offense looks like it'll be passing a little bit more in 2020. And I am expecting the rushing volume to come down. Before Melvin Gordon was signed, Phillip Lindsay was rising for me on my draft boards early in the offseason. But they actually gave Gordon a really good deal. They gave him a $16 million contract over 2 years with $13.5 million guaranteed. And Phillip Lindsay's there as an undrafted free agent who still does pose a threat to Gordon's rushing volumes. Let's talk about the rushing volume splits that could potentially happen in Denver. If it's a 50-50 split, we're talking about 170 to 180 carries for both Gordon and Lindsay. I think that's the worst case scenario here for Melvin Gordon. More realistically, I think it'll be more like a 60-40, maybe even a 65-35, which puts Gordon at the 210 to 230 carry range. But the difference for me that takes Melvin Gordon over the top is his skill set in the passing game. Even with Austin Eckler back on the Chargers, Gordon saw over 4.5 targets a game in 2019, and he's been above or on pace for over 80 targets a year over the last 3 or 4 years. Gordon's going to be a check-down option for Drew Lock. He'll be on the field for third downs. And Lindsay only saw 48 targets last year. You think of Phillip Lindsay and his profile, you think of him as more of like a explosive scat back like an Austin Eckler, but he only saw 48 targets last year. Royce Freeman actually had more than that with 50. And Gordon has a nose for the end zone. Melvin Gordon, both on the ground and through the air, has averaged 12 touchdowns a season over the last 4 years. He scored 9 touchdowns on 12 games played last season. We're kind of like ramp
It
up
seemed like he
games
was
after
cramming in
that.
2-yard runs all year long.
I mean, he was getting worked in for 2 of those games after his holdout. He's not the most efficient rusher, but he was putting up 75-plus scrimmage yards a game with all of the receiving yardage added in. He was on pace to be the RB12 last season. His previous finishes are the RB8, RB5, and RB7 in PPR leagues. His current ADP is the RB19, and I see him as a high floor RB2 with a slightly capped ceiling just because the offense is unproven, and I think we could see the wheels fall off in Denver. But Alex, if you had a draft today, where would you put Melvin Gordon? Would you take him over Le'Veon Bell, James Conner, or Chris Carson?
I would take him over a couple of those names. It's interesting. You said his ADP is RB19. I have him right at RB19 this season. I do have Lev Bell in front of him, but I would take Melvin Gordon over James Conner. I would take him over Chris Carson. So depending on who else is off the board, I'm definitely willing to take Gordon at that ADP. For me, this was a weird move by Denver because they give a running back $8 million a year with that $13.5 million guaranteed over the duration of the contract. And it's like, they already have a solid running back that, is getting the job done in Phillip Lindsay. And I would have almost seen Melvin Gordon go to a contender, like with Denver. They signed him to a 2-year deal. I don't think any of us expect Denver to be a contender for a Super Bowl over the next 2 seasons. So it's like, why do you have to go over the top and try to upgrade the running back position when you have someone adequate in Phillip Lindsay who's not costing you anything? So to me, it was a very interesting move by Denver. I do think with that contract and with the signing, they're going to give him work. So I like a lot of the things you said. But I think right now he's valued right where he should be, and I'm definitely willing to take him as my RB2.
I mean, as I'm putting together this take here, Gordon kind of moved above Chris Carson for me. I actually think I would take him over Lev Bell, James Conner, and Chris Carson in any sort of PPR until we hear about Carson's health. If we hear that the hip's fine, he's good to go, then give me Carson over Gordon. But as it stands right now, I think Gordon is the top guy out of all those four in that mid RB2 tier that we've been looking at.
Yeah, I definitely think Gordon is gonna have a solid season. And I don't think he can disappoint. I love what you said. He has a high floor. He should be the goal line back. He should get a lot of the touchdowns. He should get a lot of receiving work. And that leaves us with the question, like, what happens with Phillip Lindsay? This is a guy who 2 years ago, he was that hot waiver wire pickup week 1, and he got a lot of people into the playoffs by being a free running back 2 for the duration of the season. Last year, like you said, he was hit or miss, but he still had value as an RB2. So this year, it's like, what do we do with this guy who now is behind Melvin Gordon on the depth chart, has back-to-back 1,000-yard seasons? It's one of those situations where I just don't know that you're going to really want Phillip Lindsay on your team because the upside just feels so low. You talked about the split. I actually have the carries going with about 200 for Melvin Gordon and 170 for Phillip Lindsay. But with that, I don't have Phillip Lindsay for a ton of yards or touchdowns. I think Melvin Gordon is going to get a lot of that goal line work. So I have Gordon for the bulk of the touchdowns and Lindsay getting a couple on his own. And you said it. Lindsay's not this scat back who excels in the receiving game. He's solid. Like, he's had 35 receptions in each of his first 2 seasons, which for the running back position is fine. This season I just see Melvin Gordon coming in, taking a lot of that receiving work. Royce Freeman last year actually had 132 carries and 50 targets. So I see a lot of that work shifting directly to Melvin Gordon, and I think he is going to cut into Lindsay's workload as well. So with Phillip Lindsay, I think he's a desperation flex at best. I have him, around 750 yards for the season. So I think for, football purposes for the Denver Broncos, he's going to be a really strong RB2. But for fantasy, I just don't know that you're going to be able to trust him. There's going to be a couple of weeks where Lindsay goes for 100 yards and a touchdown with a couple catches, but trying to pick and choose which week that's going to be is just going to be too tough. So maybe if you're in a desperation situation, throw him in there as a flex. And maybe he will pop off that week and get you 15 or 20 points. But unless Gordon has an injury or misses time, it's just going to be too hard to predict. So to me, Gordon is that top 21 running back, and Phillip Lindsay is a low-end RB3, high-end RB4.
Yeah, I see Lindsay as he's like the Austin Eckler comp, but then you take away all the air usage and efficiency, and then it's just like, well, there's not really that much to like. He's kind of a pure depth play. If something were to happen to Melvin Gordon, he'll jump in there and take over that workload and usage. But until then, he's not really a guy I'm eyeing in drafts